All right, so this session is called What is Power BI? I am Angela Henry. Quick bit about me. Oh, I always forget to do this. Return focus to my slide deck. I am in High Point, North Carolina. I am a solution architect at Blue Granite. I am a data platform MVP. I tweet. I am SQL swimmer, and why? Well, it's because I am a swimmer coach and an instructor. I'm going to get on my soapbox here for 10 seconds. If you do not know how to swim, please learn. It is the only sport that could actually save your life. And if you think as an adult you cannot learn to swim, you're absolutely incorrect. There are instructors like myself who are specially trained through US Masters to teach adults how to swim, because teaching adults is very different than teaching children how to swim. But I also teach children and I have a lot of energy. So with that, let's just get going. Today, we're going to talk about, well, what is Power BI? We're going to talk about who can use Power BI, why you would want to use it, a little bit about the licensing, because that can be confusing, and then we're going to go through some demos and talk about how you would use Power BI. But before we do that, normally when I am doing this session in person, I like to take a selfie with my class, but I can't do that because we're all virtual today. So I am taking a picture of myself presenting this for you guys, and I'm going to put it out there on Twitter because, you know, nothing really happens unless you put it on social media. And I would highly recommend that if you have the ability to take a picture of yourself learning today, do that. Share it with the world. Everybody wants to see it. All right, let's go. With that, what is Power BI? So this session came about because one of my former employers, when Power BI first came out, said, hey, I heard all these people talking about Power BI. Can we use that here? And I said, well, sure, we can use that here. And he says, okay, well, will you put a presentation together really quick so that we can show those folks in the C-suite what it can do for us? So that's how this presentation came about. So, and like I said, I've been doing this session for 5 years now because Power BI is 5 years old. It's hard to believe, but it is. So I went out and the first thing I did is, of course, I Googled it. And when I Googled it, it came up with Power BI is this amazing business analytics service that enables anyone to visualize and analyze data. Wow, that's super cool. But it doesn't really tell me what Power BI is. That's a lot of marketing speak in there. So let's talk about what Power BI actually is. First off, it's not any one thing. It's a collection of things. It's a collection of software services. We've got applications and we've got connectors, and it makes all of those things work together, and it brings all of your unrelated data sources together, and it turns them into coherent, visually immersive, and interactive insights for you on every device. Now, that probably did sound like a whole lot of marketing speak, just a lot longer than what the original slide said. But what does that really mean? What this really means is that it brings all of your data together. It doesn't matter where it lives, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's in a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. It brings it all together in one place, and then it lets you see it all together on any device of your choice. So if you're using a PC, if you're using a Mac, if you're using an iPhone or an iPad or an Android device, doesn't matter. It is supported across all of those devices and all of those OSs. If you are using any web browser other than a Microsoft browser, you just need to make sure that you're on the most recent version of that browser to ensure that it will work with Power BI. So with that, that is what Power BI is. It's not any one thing. It's a whole bunch of things that work together so that you can visualize your data. So any questions so far, Monica?
So far, so good.
All right, we'll keep going. So who can use Power BI? So Power BI is actually subscription-based, just like Office 365 is. So what that means is that you have to provide your email address, and then it's provided to you on a subscription basis. So there are some rules about what kinds of email addresses you can use to sign up for Power BI. So the only ones that are allowed are work and school email addresses. What's not allowed are personal email addresses. So if you have Hotmail or Yahoo or an AOL account, not supported. Those are personal accounts. They will not work to get a subscription for Power BI. Government and military. Now I have a little asterisk here because it is actually supported, but you actually have a different cloud. So this is anybody with a .gov or a .mil on the end of their email address. So if we have any of those folks listening today, just know that you have to go through your own specific government community to get that access to Power BI. And it's not full feature parity with the commercial cloud, so things to just kind of keep in mind. Your telecom or your ISP. So I have Spectrum here where I live. They automatically hand out an email address. I can't use that to sign up for Power BI and get a subscription. All right, any questions about who can use Power BI?
I think we're good.
All right, we're gonna keep going. All right, so why would you want to use Power BI? Well, if you are at all familiar with statistics or math or anything, there's this notion of summary statistics. Summary statistics are things that describe your data. So it's things like the average, the mean, the median, the standard deviation. Those are all things that kind of give you a general idea of what your data looks like. Well, back in the 70s, there was a researcher by the last name of Anscombe who created 4 different data sets that all produced the exact same summary statistics. However, when he plotted those values out, they produced completely different pictures. So all 4 of these tell completely different stories. So if you were relying solely on just your summary statistics to tell you about your data, you could be missing some very valuable information. So visualization, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That is the biggest reason to use Power BI. You want to be able to visualize that data. What if you want to do something really quick and easy? You'll see when we get to the demos, Power BI is super easy. As Christian Wade says, clicky, clicky, draggy, droppy. And it's just that easy to make something work in Power BI. What happens if you're working at a company that doesn't have a full-time report writer? I know the companies that I've worked at previously, there were no full-time report writers, so we had to wait on the IT department in order to be able to get a report. With Power BI, you don't have to do that. The whole kind of premise behind Power BI is to empower, the data citizens to be able to build whatever they need. And lastly, consistency. So I would actually rank this as the number 2 reason to use Power BI. You can create one data set and have multiple audiences use that data set. So that way everybody's using the same data, everybody's on the same page. So to me, those are the biggest reasons why you would want to use Power BI. Any questions, or I'm still good?
You're still good, very clear in your explanations. I think we're good.
Awesome, okay, let's keep going. Now we need to talk about licensing. Now a quick bit about licensing. Power BI, it can be a little complicated. I have attended 4-hour sessions that talk about nothing but Power BI licensing. So we're just gonna hit just the very basics here to kind of introduce you to the kind of things that are available. So first, there's the free edition of Power BI. There's no collaboration, so it's just you. You are the only one who can see your data. That's it. You do have the ability to stream data, but you're limited to 1 million rows per hour. And again, access to your data is limited to just you. Now I have a little asterisk here, and I will address that, but just know, by default, you are the only one that can see your data once you upload it to the service. Next, you have a pro license. A pro license allows you more collaboration. You get unlimited streaming data, and you can manage access to that data via Azure Active Directory. And finally, we have premium. And premium isn't really licensing. Premium is a capacity. And with that, you get dedicated capacity in the cloud. Whereas if you have a pro license, the underlying hardware in those data centers may be shared amongst multiple subscriptions. Whereas if you have a premium subscription, you have dedicated capacity. That hardware is not being shared by anybody else. All right. It also gives you the ability, because you're not sharing with other people, the ability to scale up or out, down, in as you need. So if you have like really heavy reporting needs at the end of the month for financials, you can scale it up. But during the rest of the month, it's pretty slow. So you can scale it back down and you can do some cost savings in there. The other thing, if you are not quite ready to put your stuff up in the cloud, with a premium subscription, you get the Power BI report server, which is an on-premises, scaled back, not quite feature parity with the commercial cloud Power BI service. And this is something that stays in your data center. You have complete control over it. Nobody else does. The good thing about premium is that only people who create reports need a pro license. Anybody who is just consuming or viewing that data, they do not need a pro license. They only need a free license. So now we need to talk about cost. So free is obviously free. Yay! Everybody likes free. Pro is $9.99 per month per user, and that's US dollars right there. And that has been the same price for the last 5 years when they first introduced the pro license. And finally, you have premium. Dun, 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 dun. That starts at $5,000 a month. Now, I heard some audible gasps. I realize that this is virtual, but I know some of you did. Let me explain this. So, one of the reasons that they came up with this premium capacity is in larger companies. So I used to work for Raytheon. We had 80,000 employees worldwide. So if I had to buy a pro license for 80,000 people, that's $800,000 a month that they would have had to spend. That $5,000 a month is looking awfully good to me right now. So that's kind of where you see that coming from. So it's geared more towards larger employers, larger organizations who have the money to spend. All right, with that, let's do a little quick side-by-side comparison of what you get in free versus pro. With the free, you don't get apps, you don't get email subscriptions, and you don't get the embedded APIs. So those are all things that are really cool. And if you are probably more than 5 people in your organization, you're probably going to want to go with pro licenses. And then collaboration. You can actually share your data with other people in your organization. So you can get peer-to-peer sharing, you get app workspaces, and then you also get the additional Analyze in Excel and Analyze in Power BI desktop functionality with a pro license. So with that, do we have any questions on licensing?
Not specifically on licensing, but we do have a question from Claudia. She's wondering if you're going to touch on the differences between Power BI and Tableau and what those differences are.
I am not specifically going to talk about the differences between Power BI and Tableau, other than I can tell you Power BI loves the star schema model. You build a star schema. So if you're familiar with Tableau, you give it one big flat file and you work with that. So that is the biggest difference between Power BI and Tableau, other than price. So I know Tableau is significantly more expensive. I haven't used Tableau in a very long time, so I can't speak to how much more expensive it is right now, but just know that it is more expensive. Did that answer?
I think that's exactly what they were looking for. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's keep going. So now we need to talk about how you're going to use Power BI. So I like to think of Power BI in building blocks. You have data sets, you have reports, and you have dashboards. Your data sets are your foundation. I use the analogy of building a house. If you have a good foundation, your house is going to be sturdy and strong and safe. If you have a good data set to start with, your reports are going to be awesome and they are going to work really well. Next, when you build a house, you add framing. So those are the reports we're going to build on top of that data set, and that's where we're going to put those visualizations. That's the framing. That's what we're going to look, and that's how it's going to look. And then lastly, you have a dashboard, which is like the roof. It's the 50,000-foot view of what that house looks like. No detail, very high level, bird's eye view of what your data looks like. So those are the building blocks of Power BI. So let's talk about data sets now. So data sets are something that you're either going to import or connect to. And when you import, you can import from a local drive, from a OneDrive, whether it be a personal drive or a work OneDrive, doesn't matter, and from SharePoint team sites. So I barely know how to spell SharePoint, so I can't answer questions about SharePoint, but just know that you can do that, and there's tons of documentation out there that will help you with that. So if you don't import that data set, then you're going to connect to it. And you can connect to all kinds of software as a service services. So things like Salesforce or Google Analytics or Web Trends, those are all software as a service type things. You can also connect to databases. It doesn't matter whether that database is hosted in the cloud or whether it's hosted on premises. You can connect to those things. Data flows, it's a little bit beyond the scope of an intro class. Just know that that's something that is out there, and it is another thing that you can connect to. All right, that was data sets. Let's talk about reports. So reports contain your visualizations, and they're created from data sets. A couple things to note about this. You can only have one data set per report, but data sets can be used in multiple reports. So an example is I used to work for a manufacturing company, and the plant floor manager needed a different view of the data than the sales or the executive people. The plant floor manager needed to know if they were meeting their productivity numbers, whereas the sales guys and the C-suite people, they wanted to know if we were making the sales numbers, keeping it within our budget and meeting our forecast. So you start out using the same data set, but you build different reports based on the audience. It's that one golden data set that everybody can use. So how do you create reports? Well, there are a few different ways. You can use Power BI Desktop. This is an application that you download from the Power BI site or the Microsoft Store. It's absolutely free. Microsoft does not charge you to use Power BI Desktop. Think of this as your development environment. It's your development, it's one of the development tools in your development toolbox. You can create reports within the Power BI service itself. So if you don't want to use Power BI Desktop, you want to do everything up in the service, up in the cloud, you can create those within the Power BI service. And lastly, if somebody has shared a dashboard with you and given you permission, the correct permissions, you can actually import some of those reports into your workspace if you like it, but you need to make a few tweaks to it and you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So that's how you would create those reports. And lastly, we have dashboards. Remember, this is our 50,000-foot bird's eye view of what our data looks like. So this is a Power BI dashboard. And we've got a new vocabulary word that we have to learn here, tiles. So dashboards are made up of tiles, and all of these things on here are tiles. And a tile can be either an individual visualization from a report, or it can be an entire page of a report. Either of those things can be a tile on a dashboard. So let's look at this dashboard a little bit closer because there's a lot of stuff going on here. The dashboard is something that exists in the service. So you're going to be looking at it through a browser. So you have your navigation pane. It shows up on the left-hand side. It allows you to navigate throughout the service. Next, you have your canvas, and that's where all of those tiles live. That's either our individual visualizations or an entire page of a report. Next, you have your Q&A box. This allows you to ask natural language questions of your data. You have your help and feedback buttons. These are super important up in the top right-hand corner. This is where you're going to download Power BI Desktop. If you want to access on-premises data, this is where you'll go to download the data gateway, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You have your title of your dashboard. It shows up at the top a little bit towards the left. If you use Office 365, I guess I should update my slide because now it's called Microsoft 365. Boy, okay. Anyway, squirrel. You can actually launch that directly from this dashboard page with that little, I call it, looks like a dice to me. So the little dice looking icon up in the top left. And then next to that, if you want to go to the Power BI homepage, all you have to do is click on the words Power BI right next to it, and that will take you out there. And then lastly, you have these additional dashboard actions. So these are changing constantly. So the cool thing about Power BI is Microsoft has invested a lot of money into this, and they really want it to succeed. So they are constantly having doing releases for new features that they're adding. So the service is actually updated on a weekly cadence, and then the Power BI desktop application that you download, that is updated on a monthly cadence. So they're constantly releasing new features. So what shows up in these additional dashboard actions can change all the time. I've given up trying to keep this little piece up to date because it changes so frequently. All right, now we need to talk about those different experiences. You have your on-premises experiences. So the Power BI desktop application, that's the one that I said that you download and you install on your local machine. Power BI report server. I talked about this one a little bit earlier. Power BI report server is available to you if you have a premium subscription or if you have software assurance with an enterprise agreement with Microsoft. So you're not quite ready to go to the cloud, you kind of want to test it out, well then you can download and install Power BI report server on one of your on-premises servers. None of your stuff goes to the cloud, it all stays right there. So those are the different on-premises experiences that you can have with Power BI. Then there's off-premises, so out in the cloud. You have the Power BI service. You also have this thing called Power BI Embedded. This allows you to embed the visualizations that you create in Power BI into custom applications, and you do that with Power BI Embedded. That's a little bit beyond the scope. I just wanted you to be aware of that. And then your mobile devices. You can take, those executives, they've all got their phone with them. They want to know what's going on all the time. Now it doesn't matter whether you have one of those fruity phones like I do, whether you've got the Android or a Windows phone. You can take your data with you everywhere on your mobile device. So with that, we're going to do some demos. Do I have any questions before we start the demos?
I think we're good.
All right. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead. All right, and you're still seeing just a blank desktop, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Should see my web browser now.
Sure can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So if you go to powerbi.com and you've already created an account and the first time you log in, this is kind of what you're going to see. Now I have a bunch of stuff out here. So I have all kinds of things. So I have my favorites and frequents, my recents, all the different workspaces, any apps that I have. anything that people have shared with me. And then they have these cool learn how to use Power BI. They have all of these different guided learnings and tutorials down here. So if you want more information, right here is a really good place to start. So let's go ahead and take a look at a dashboard that I've got out here. You can kind of see all of the different things that are out here. That was just exactly from my slide. So let's pull some data in. So at the beginning, I told you that I'm a swimmer. I swim for US Masters and I do swim in swim meets. And I'm also a data geek. So I am a distance freestyler. That's what I specialize in. And I want to know how I'm doing. Am I getting better over time, like a fine wine? That's what I like to think of myself as, but maybe not. So I went out and I pulled all this data and I dumped it into an Excel spreadsheet. And I thought, I can't just look at this, you know, rows and rows of numbers. That's not super helpful. So I need to be able to visualize this data. So if you are in the service, which is where I am, I'm in a browser. If you come down here all the way in the lower left-hand corner, you can see this get data. That's where you're going to start. So I'm going to click that. And here we can go out and we can discover content from your organization or different services, or we can create new content by importing files or connecting to databases. So I'm going to go get this file. It's a local file. So I'm just going to pull this in. I got to navigate to it. All right, there's my swimming stuff. It's an Excel file. I just want to import this. I don't want to upload the entire spreadsheet. I just want to import that data. And like magic, it's all done. And if we zoom over here, you can see it right here. I've just added it. Whoops. That was the wrong button. Zoom back in a little bit better. All right, right here. And you'll notice this tiny little, it looks like the sun is shining. That shows you that it's a brand new data set that has been added. So we want to create a report based on this. So let's go view that data. So we're going to click that view data set. I've noticed that this has gotten a little, sometimes it doesn't always. If you hit the refresh button, it works just fine. So now you'll notice that we've got a filters pane, a visualizations pane, and a fields pane. So on the right-hand side at our fields, you can see I have these two tables. It's kind of like a little matrix icon with a header at the top. So those are tables. I have finish times and I have split times. So I want to know if I'm getting better as I'm getting older or am I slowing down? So I want to look at my finish times to see. So I'm just going to grab a line chart really quick. Let's drag it out and make it a little bit bigger. And we want to look at my finish time. So that's the value that I want to look at. And oops, I want my time in seconds. I grabbed the wrong one. Values. And we want to look at this over time. So that's what's going to be on my axis. And that looks a little wonky. So let's break this down by event name. And just like that, clicky, clicky, draggy, droppy, we have a visualization. And it looks like I'm fairly consistent. You can select an event name that will highlight what's on the chart. So it looks like I'm super consistent at 400 free, not so consistent with the 500, slowing down a little bit. 800, ooh, it looks like I might even have dropped some time from my last one. So that's super cool. Well, that's nice to know that my finish times are good, but if I want to get better as a distance freestyler, I need to make sure that my split times are consistent. If you want to be a great freestyler like Katie Ledecky, who is absolutely amazing, she has, I think, 18 world records in her name. So she is amazing. I have to know what my split times are. So let's go ahead and create a new visualization and add my split times to that. So split time, that's what I'm looking at. And we want to see it over the laps. And we want to see it by event name. So let's go ahead and grab the event name and drop it in here. And we got an error. Well, that was actually on purpose. I pulled, so everything worked until I pulled from another table. And you'll notice that by default, it gives us a summarization of the split times. Well, count of split times is not super cool. So we don't have a whole lot of control over how it does that summarization, or if we want to connect to data that's in a different table. All right, so let's do the same thing, but do this in Power BI Desktop and see what those differences are. So let's grab, first we have to get some data. So if you are in the Power BI Desktop application, you're going to go to Get Data, and we're just going to import from Excel. There is my swimming spreadsheet. And if you are at all familiar with importing external data in Excel, this window should look very familiar to you. So we can see there's my finish time table and my split times table. So we're just going to load that data in here. Takes it a couple of seconds. All right, and now you can see over here on the right-hand side, we have those same finish time and split times. We're gonna drag this out. Let's try and recreate that split times one again. So make sure that your visualization has focus. You can tell because it's got these little anchors on it. So we want the split time. We're gonna put that in our values pane, our values. Then we are going to grab the lap. That's going over here. All right, and now we want to add the event name. Look at that, it worked. So the difference, one of the big differences between the service and the Power BI desktop application is that when you import into the service, Power BI service is not as smart as the desktop application, and it will not automatically detect any relationships. Now, I don't have any relationships defined in my spreadsheet, but what I did do is I did create the same column, a column in each table that had the same name and the same data type. And Power BI Desktop said, hey, look, those are the event ID that exists in both of those tables. I bet they're related. So if I come over here to the model, it looks like a little diagram right here. And if I click on that, look at that. It created this relationship for me, even though there wasn't one, and it connected it on the event ID. So it's a lot smarter than the service. So if you are going to be dealing with more than one table, you're most likely going to want to use Power BI Desktop to create your data visualizations and your data sets. So with that, we can add some other things in here. I am going to open a pre-baked one because time is of the essence here. So I've got one that I have already created. And once you create your data set and you get it all modeled and all the visualizations are exactly how you want them, then we're going to do what you call publish to the service. Now, when you publish to the service, you are taking what is on your desktop, data that is only in your desktop, and you are putting it out there in the Power BI service. So here's one that I have created. So here's my finish times, here's my split times. I've even added a slicer so that I don't have to select individually here. I can come over here, I can slice that data and only see for both visualizations based on what I've selected in my slicer. So let's go ahead and publish this to the web, or publish this to the service. So I click that, it says, do you want to save your changes? Yep, we'll go ahead and save that. It's going to publish it to the service. Now, because I have a pro license, I have access to more than just my workspace. If you only have a free license, you have one workspace, and it is called my workspace and you cannot change the name of it. So, but because I have a pro license, I have all of these other workspaces available to me that I've created. So I'm going to put this in my what is Power BI workspace. And it's going to go through and it's going to say, yep, we're publishing this up to the Power BI service. And it just takes it a couple of minutes. No, actually not minutes. It takes it a few seconds. And then it'll come back and it'll say, oh, success, it's there, yay. And we're going to say, yep, great, thanks. We're going to go back to our web browser. We're going to change the workspace. So all I did was click this little caret next to the workspaces. We put it in the what is Power BI workspace. So we're going to select that one. We don't care about the stuff that was in there, so we're going to get rid of that. And as you can see, here are those two things. So again, it's got the little yellow sunshine coming out of it right here and right here. So we know that those are brand new. We just did it. We can see the date that they were refreshed. This one is a report. You can see it has a little bit, it has kind of a bar chart visualization on it. And then we have a data set, which kind of shows up as this little cylindrical object, which is kind of the universal symbol for databases. So we're going to go ahead and get out of this. Let's go look at our swimming demo report. And there it is. Everything that was in my Power BI desktop is now in the service. So that's pretty cool. Well, we've talked about data sets, we've talked about reports. Now we need to talk about dashboards. So in order to get objects on a dashboard, we have another new vocabulary word. It's called pin. So we're going to pin either a visualization or an entire report to a dashboard. How do you do that? Well, there are a couple of different ways. If you want to pin an individual visualization, you'll notice if I hover over the top right-hand corner, I get this awesome little push pin right here, visual, and it says pin visual. Or we can come over here and we can say pin live page. This allows me to pin the entire report to a dashboard. So let's just go ahead and pin that whole page to a dashboard. Now it's going to say, hey, you don't have any existing dashboards. Do you want to create a new one? Sure, let's create a new one. We're just going to call it Angela Swimming, and we're going to pin live. And then it says, hey, you've pinned it out there. Do you want to go to it, or do you want to create a phone view? Now this is super, super cool. Once you have created a dashboard, you can change the layout that is specifically for a mobile device, whether you want it in portrait or landscape mode. So let's just go take a look at that dashboard. So there it is. We've just created it. And ta-da! You'll see this is an entire tile. It's pinned to the entire page here. And now we can add some additional things on here because that looks kind of boring. So maybe I want to, there's my add a tile. So we're just going to click that little ellipsis. Let's add a picture. So I want to add an image to give me a little bit of so that I personalize it a little bit. Click next. Notice that when you do this, it asks for a URL. So you can't upload something from your hard drive. It actually has to already exist on the internet. Well, I happen to have a URL, so I'm just going to paste that in here. And look at that, and say apply. Ta-da! It's magic. Now, when you add tiles to a dashboard, it automatically adds them to the end, to the bottom. So let's go ahead and move this up a little bit. You'll notice how things just slide right out of the way. You can also add web content. You can add a text box. So let's do that. Let's give it a title, and we're just gonna call this Angela Swimming. We're gonna apply that, and see, again, it dropped it down to the bottom. So let's bring it up here to the top. I could have used some cool formatting. There was tons of it available in there. And one last thing, let's add some super motivation, you can add some video. So we can add a video. Now, you can only use YouTube or Vimeo, and again, it has to be a URL. So I am going to grab one of my favorite all-time YouTube videos. We're going to apply that. We're going to, and when you drag a video, you actually have to use the top left-hand corner to drag it. And look at that. It will play that content right here within your dashboard. Those are professional flip erasers. Do not try that at home. All right. So the last really cool thing that you can do on for adding different tiles is you can add streaming data. Streaming data can only exist in a dashboard. So let's go ahead and add some streaming data so you can see what that looks like. Now, streaming data sets, it either has to be a PubNub or it has to be Azure Analytics stream. The word just went right out of my head, but whatever their streaming analytics is. I have two that I've already created. So let's go ahead and grab this one, say next. We can pick what kind of visualization we want to use. Let's use a line chart. Let's add a value. Now, what I'm using is a publicly available sensor streaming data through PubNub. So we want to, over time, and we want to look at, let's look at the temperature. And we'll say next. And we can give it some titles and all that kind of stuff. We're just gonna, for brevity, we're just gonna come down here and look at that. It's sliding all the way, again, it adds to the bottom, but it's streaming that data live on my dashboard. So pretty cool. Clicky, clicky, draggy, droppy. Very, very simple, very easy to use.
Angela, we do have a couple of questions if now's a good time to address some of those.
It is. Actually, I was just getting ready to say, Lynn, let's go back to our slides and see if we have any questions.
Perfect. One, since we're talking about your data here, is there any way you could show us your spreadsheet layout on Excel so we know what that incoming data looks like?
Sure. So I'm opening up my Excel spreadsheet. It's just a really simple spreadsheet right here. I have it formatted so that they are in tables. So remember we were talking about that event ID and how it lived in both tables. That's how Power BI Desktop was able to infer that relationship. And if you don't like the relationships that it creates or that it thinks are correct, you can actually go in and change them or delete them. Completely up to you. So that's my spreadsheet. Any other questions?
Yes. We've got Ivy wants to know if you can talk a little bit about some of the differences between Power BI Desktop and Power BI Desktop optimized for report server, specifically the features and release schedules and compatibilities.
Okay, so if you are using Power BI Report Server, that is an on-premises product, and there is a special Power BI Desktop application that pairs with that. So you can't use the regular Power BI Desktop application that you can download from the service or get from the store. You have to use the one that is specified for that release of Power BI Report Server. They release that, I think, 3 times a year. So every 4 months, if I did my math correctly. So it doesn't have the same release cadence, and there is not full feature parity. You do not get dashboards in Power BI Report Server. Let's see, a lot of the AI visualizations you cannot use in Power BI Report Server because you're on premises, and they work in the service because you're in the cloud and it has access to a whole lot more compute power. So that's one of the big reasons and another big difference. We good there?
And then I've got one last question for you. Okay. So they're wondering, does the publish action relate to just publishing the report to the cloud only, or is it the same one used to publish to report server, and is there a difference?
There is a difference. So if you use publish inside Power BI Desktop application, you are publishing, you're going to publish to the service. That will publish to the service. If you are using Power BI Desktop application that's paired with the Power BI Report Server, You can use the publish. I don't use that because Power BI Report Server looks a lot like, well, doesn't look a lot like, it is a lot like SQL Server reporting services. I use the upload functionality within the report manager window to upload my reports. I have a client right now, they use Power BI Report Server, and that's what we do to promote our reports, is we actually do the direct upload, or we use a PowerShell script to automate that to go through the different environments of UAT, production, whatever. Did I answer that enough, or do we need more?
I think you got it. I'll have them hit you up with any follow-up questions offline.
Okay.
But that's all the questions for now.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get back to our slide deck really quick. All right. So we've looked at what Power BI is and how we can import data, but what if we want to connect or access on-premises data? Well, to do that, you need the on-premises data gateway. And as of last week, there are now 2 different versions. It used to just be one. For the last 5 years, it's been one, and then you had to choose the option. Now there are 2 different versions that you need. One is either standard mode or there's personal mode, and you get this via the user actions on the little drop-down arrow on the top right-hand corner. If you're in the service, just click that, and you get the data gateway, and it'll prompt you over to this nice little screen, and you can select whether you want the standard or the personal mode. Let's do a quick comparison side by side of these things. So if you're using the standard mode, which is what you should be using if this is for your company. If you're just testing out and want to kind of kick the tires on something that you're working on locally and it's not for anybody else's eyes, you can use that personal mode. And you can see that it's run as an app for users who aren't administrators. If you want multiple people to be able to access that data source, you're going to have to use the standard. Again, if this is going to be a company-wide thing, you're going to want to use standard mode. If you are using the personal mode, this is, again, something that you're just trying to kind of kick the tires on and make sure that you've got it right. There are some requirements if you want to download and install the data gateway. Minimum requirements: it has to be a 64-bit OS, and you have to have .NET Framework 4.7.2. Recommended: you actually have an 8-core CPU, 8 gig of RAM, SQL Server 2012, or not SQL Server, Windows Server 2012 R2, and they do recommend that you use SSDs. I like to think of the gateway, so no data is actually stored on your data gateway. I think of the data gateway as like an operator, the old-timey operators, you know, when they would answer the phone and then they would move one plug to another port and connect you to your party. That's essentially how the data gateway works. So after you have installed the data gateway, depending on which version you're doing, you've got the standard mode here on the left-hand side. You can see the basic difference is where it's going to install this application at. And then once you have it installed, standard configuration on the left-hand side, you can either tell it to register it as a new one, or you can migrate, restore, or take over an existing gateway. And on the personal mode, you have no option to do any configuration. It just says, yep, it's online, it's ready to use, let's go. And quick bit of security, secure by default, how it works. You get a request from Power BI. It hops onto the Gateway Cloud Service, hops on the Azure bus, drops down into your gateway, sends the request out to your data source. Your data source returns that to the gateway sends it back to the bus, and then the bus distributes it out via the Gateway Cloud Service. So it is all secure by default. And that's how you use Power BI. I highly recommend that you stay engaged if you want to learn more. Community.powerbi.com is a great resource. They have forums, user groups, and a community blog out there to get more information. There's my contact information. I will make my slide deck available. I'll tweet it out with a link on there. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do. Just let me know where you saw me. Just a little blurb. It's interesting being a woman in tech on LinkedIn. You get interesting requests all the time. I do have my own blog, SQLswimmer.com, and that's where my slide deck will be posted. There will be a link on there. Other resources. These will be in a PDF format, and they will be clickable to be able to go and look at all of the different resources that are out there. And then if you want to go even deeper, the Power BI blog, Melissa Coates, she is SQL Chick, and she has her own company now called Coates Data Strategies. She's got some great stuff. Reza, Chris Webb, and even more. I highly recommend Guy in a Cube if you're just getting started. He does these anywhere from 3 to 7 minute videos. He and Patrick, Adam Saxton and Patrick LeBlanc from Microsoft, to just little tidbits to get you started with. And that is it. That is all I have. So do we have any other questions?
Actually, there is one.
Okay.
How does the refresh work on report server? I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen, but if you can talk through that, that would be great.
Okay. So how does refresh work on report server? That answer is it depends. It depends on your data source. Is it something that you have imported, or is it something that you are connecting to? If you are connecting to a live connection or using direct query for either an analysis services or an on-prem database like SQL Server, those are live. Every time you click on something in your report, it refreshes the data. If you are importing, you can set up a refresh schedule. I don't know the frequency though. We don't use that a lot at the client that I'm working with. We use analysis services, and we use everything as a live connection. That's an interesting question. I'll have to research that.
All right, I hope that answered your question. Thank you, Angela. That was actually really, really well done. I've seen that presentation more than once, and it seems to get better and better every time I see it. I learn something. So great job.
Thank you. Thank you.